Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today as we deep dive into the right-click tools software update deployment status dashboard. I'll provide a brief introduction here, and then we'll hand it over to our speakers today for the deep dive. This webinar will be recorded, and we will be sending out a link early next week with the recording, along with the 2 other webinar recordings from this week as well. So starting with a brief introduction for those that may not know much about right-click tools or aren't as familiar, we have 3 pillars of the right-click tools, or three goals that the tools really help to accomplish. The first one is improve productivity. And for those of you that use the free tools or the community edition, you probably see a lot of shortcuts that the tools help with to save a lot of time. The next pillar we have is actionable insights, and this really speaks to the dashboards that we'll show in this series, along with the one for today. And it really helps to surface information on compliance and security levels, paired with tools to remediate any vulnerabilities that you do find. And then the third pillar we have is automation. And our speaker today, Bryan Dam, has worked extensively in this pillar. We have a full automation platform within the console, as well as a kiosk manager tool to help lock down single purpose devices for computer labs or digital signage. So really the first pillar is really around our community edition, helping to improve productivity. And then the actual insights and automation really speak to what's in the enterprise edition. So you'll get a glimpse of that today. A quick view on some of our customers. We have hundreds of folks that use the enterprise edition. Many of the logos you probably recognize. We're in pretty much all industries. And our speaker for today, as mentioned, is Bryan Dam. He's a software engineer here at Recast, and he'll be going through a deep dive of the dashboard. We also have Marty Miller on the line. He's our customer success manager, works with customers as they're getting onboarded to the tools, does training sessions, answers technical questions along the way. So he will be on Q&A within the webinar. If you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A section of the webinar, and we'll get them answered either in real time, or at the end of the presentation, we'll leave some time for open Q&A. So with that, we'll hand it over to Bryan.
So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Bryan Dam. And as Chelsea said, I'm an engineer here at Recast. And I'm super excited today. I talk a lot about software updates. And I've had done multiple sessions just on deep dives into software update reporting. So I'm super excited that somebody's decided to actually pay me real money to do that instead of just doing it for fun. So super excited to be here to talk about this specific dashboard. This is part of a whole series. And they picked me for this one, and I'm super happy they did. What I want to talk about briefly is where this, in my mind, where this sits in the proverbial market. There's lots of reporting options out there. I want to talk about where the data is coming from, because that's a huge, you got to know everyone to ask that, right? We show this to people all the time, and they're like, well, where's the data from, and what does it mean, right? So I want to talk about what does compliance actually mean here. Then I want to kind of go through some of the features and talk about the use cases that they support and kind of why we added them in here. Altogether, hopefully I can hit this down into about 20 minutes, so we shouldn't be that long, which for me would be a miracle. So first, like where does this kind of sit, right? So the big thing that I love about this particular dashboard is that it's built into the console, right? It's not SSRS based. It's not Power BI, although I love both of those technologies. They're great. There's no requirement for them at all. And it's right in the console. You don't have to click on something that takes you to something different. It is a real dashboard directly in the config manager console. And you can see I have it open here. You can go to the Recast node, and this is what you're going to see. So I really love it for that. That was our main goal, right? Something visual, something in the console, which makes it That's better, in my opinion, than the SSRS stuff that comes with Config Manager. There's other reporting solutions out there, of course. What this isn't like eight different layers of reports to drag into. We'll show it all. And so that's kind of the plus. That's the plus and minuses. I love it because it's right in the console, and it gives you a great visual overview of what your patching situation is like. So let's talk about where the data comes from. The data comes from one of two. It comes from Config Manager ultimately. That's the only place. It's how we get that data. By default, we'll pull it out of WMI, which isn't great. If you've done anything extensive in WMI, the idea of pulling all of this data out of there should rightfully scare you. And so our preferred method is you would configure your Recast management server, and you would tell it the SQL server and the SQL database that you're using for your config manager environment, and we'll just go do SQL queries instead of WQL queries, and it'll just the performance gain there is hard to overstate. So if you set this up, highly recommend you put the SQL data. But that does mean, in terms of permissions, the people that are running this need at least read access to the tables. What data we actually pulling? We're pulling the lowest, most granular level data there is, right there. I forget what the table name is off the top of my head, but it is one of the V update compliance, I think, and it is every update by every device. And the reason we do that is so that we can live slice it and dice it, right? And that's what we're going to show you here in a second. And so what actually happens when you click on this software update deployment status node is we actually immediately start loading all that data in the background. And so what you click in here is actually all about filtering that data down. But it's all coming from Config Manager. And again, you want to do it from WQL. The next question is, and I talk about this a lot in some of the sessions I do on reporting, is what is compliance, right? How do you define compliance? When we look at this chart here in the middle, and we'll show that off in more detail later, but you see immediately we've got unknown, compliant, and non-compliant. And the question you should always ask is, well, great, what does that mean? Unknown, what that means is when we load that data that I talked about, which is every device and every update, unknown means for one of these devices you can see here, we don't have any data. Which means that machine has not reported back any compliance data at all, or it just hasn't yet been processed by Config Manager, which is that's a problem. You should know that. Compliant means we did get data back, and all of it reports that update is compliant, which either means it's not applicable to that device, right? This update isn't needed, or it means that it is needed and it's installed. Non-compliant then means there's one or more updates. So we got data back, but one or more of them says it's not installed. So that's about as simple as you can get in terms of what those three mean. I think it's the right way to define it, but that's what those three states mean. And the whole point of this dashboard and all the other settings and the things we're going to talk about now is all about, okay, great. Now, how do I define that scope? Because that's really where most organizations seem to differ, right? Few people are going to argue with me about that definition of unknown, compliant, and non-compliant. Where people will argue is, well, I only want, here's the scope of the updates I care about, or here's the devices that I care about. And so for the last one, although we default to all systems here, we go ahead and give you a drop down of all your device collections, right? So I can go in here and select another collection here, and why not? Let's go ahead and do that. The trick in our demo environment is to find an actual, actually did it automatically there. You can see it changed. Now we're limiting to this particular collection. So if you're only responsible for doing certain endpoints in your environment, where you're in a point of sales team, or maybe you're just the whole desktop versus server thing, again, all your collections, that's a obvious and clear kind of ask. The other ones get more granular, and they all come from stuff that either we wanted or customers have told us, well, we need to limit this or the scope by these things. And the first one is deployed updates. Now, the reason we add this one is because, sure, in many cases, you're not going to deploy all your software updates. And that's fine. That's sort of expected in certain cases. We do default to not having that enabled, and it is important, I think, and I want to make that clear. Like every once in a while, you should review that data. You should review what updates are not installed because they're not deployed. Right? That is a key metric, or an important one. And I'm not saying you do it every day or every month or every week, maybe every month, but a couple of times a year for sure. You should say, well, what's my compliance look like for all updates, whether I've deployed them or not? And you kind of need to justify to yourself, well, no, this is right. This isn't deployed and it shouldn't be. But in my experience, when you take that view a few times a year, you're going to find stuff you're like, yeah, why is that not deployed, right? Or my ADR is not correct, or did they fail? Or, there could be 1,000 reasons that it didn't get deployed. But you should consider that as part of your reporting metrics, right? But on a day-to-day basis, what you tend to want to know is, well, I deployed this update and is it installed? And so, of course, that's why we go ahead and give you that option. I'm going to go back to all computers just because it gives me a better data set here. We don't have thousands and thousands of devices in here. So we're going to go ahead and limit that to just deployed updates. Let me go ahead and deselect that. The other thing is, okay, you might want to limit by specific software update groups. Now here you can see we're actually doing we're recreating our software update groups every month, so we don't have monthly SUGs showing here. But if you did, they would all show up here, right? So you could pick not one or multiple software update groups that you care about, and when you do that, you will see that the data should go ahead and refresh itself. And so it's a very common ask, right? Hey, I want to know based on my monthly software update group, or maybe you have a yearly or a catch-up, right? Whatever one you want to be able to filter down by that, and so of course we include that. The next one that is very common, and this gets to just how do you create consistent reporting, right? If we just had those three options that we've defined so far, what would happen every month is Microsoft would release some new patches. And the moment that you sync those patches, now every single machine in your organization is now officially non-compliant, right? Because there's an update that's not even deployed yet, and certainly it hasn't installed it. And so what that creates, if you look historically, is it creates this kind of seesaw chart, right? Like you're really, really compliant right up until Patch Tuesday, or whenever, Patch Tuesday or a day or two later when you sync, and then all of a sudden compliance plummets. And so what a lot of organizations do, they define compliance for them as, well, updates that are older than X number of days. So we have that here as well. And that's super important, again, just for that consistent reporting from a historical perspective, so that just because it's Patch Tuesday plus 1 or 2, it doesn't mean your compliance is now shot down to absolute 0. I'm actually going to go back to the Win 10 group here, because I think that that will show some of those things better. See, now our compliance should be good. The last thing I want to show here is, actually, that's what I need to do. Here you go. The other thing I want to show here is the classifications, and this is really kind of the last. Oh, that's my problem, isn't it? That's my problem. Sorry, just realized what I was doing wrong. I had been playing in here early and deselected these, so we weren't actually reporting for any of the classifications. Let me go ahead and reset this up a little bit. So there you go. That's what I intended to show. So here you can see the classifications, and this is one that I have problems with. We have it because I think we need it. It's kind of customers demand it, and so we shall provide it. My perspective is all updates all the time, right? We're in a cumulative update world, so if you're not, if the latest cumulative update's not patched or not installed, then you're not compliant, right? So futzing around with which classifications, and to be clear, a lot of organizations are like, we only do critical and security, right? I think that world has passed us by. But I know there's still organizations out there. And the other thing is when I come into a new environment and you're trying to get a handle on things, I'm totally fine saying, yeah, we're going to focus on the critical and security updates, right? If there's been no reporting, or nobody has been really watching this data and reacting to it, it could be kind of a mess. So I can totally appreciate we want to prioritize fixing the critical and security updates. But the long-term goal really for me should be to always have all of these selected. Again, it's a feature. If whether it's temporary or that's just how your organization rolls, you can totally apply that filtering. So that's all talking about the scope, right? How do we limit what updates or what devices this dashboard is reporting on? Let's dig briefly now into the actual data we're seeing here, right? You've seen this chart change around. So this is your device compliance, right? And if you click on this chart, you're going to start seeing details populate below. And for the updates, right, if we click on this, we're going to see our 1 compliant device. We click on non-compliant, we're getting a 7. Then we can further drill down into the actual, here's the actual updates that are reporting for this particular device. And we can, we get release notes, we can see here, are they deployed or not, right? That's, earlier when I was talking about that use case of looking, hey, am I not deploying an update? Well, this is great, right? This is going to show you, hey, here's updates for this box, and well, they're not deployed, and why is that? The other thing we are, our tools are called the right-click tools, and so one of the things we're sort of adamant about is that we should be able to, this should all be actionable data, right? So we can come into this non-compliant device. It doesn't have to be one. We can actually do multiple, if I dare do that here. Right, we can pick these devices and we can right-click on them, and we can go ahead and run our any device-based tool. Now, obviously, the one that makes the most sense in the software update dashboard is to install missing software updates, right? And so this is actually going to open up, if the demo gods are kind to me, they're actually going to open up the software updates tab of the Remote Software Center. And what it just did is it went to those 2 boxes and it queried Software Center, the underlying WMI, and said, okay, well, what's showing up in Software Center? And it's going to show me all the updates that are sitting there waiting to be installed. And from this interface, I can go ahead and select them all. I could click install, and it would go ahead and trigger off those installs. I think one of those boxes is probably, oh great, my internet connection is unstable. What a great time to be alive. We can see here one of the computers was not on, so that's great. And we could click install. I'm not actually going to go do that right now because we actually like our demo environment to look kind of crappy from a compliance standpoint. It makes a better demo than, hey, everything's compliant like I was showing you initially. So that's kind of the levels you can dig to onto the device side. On the right side of the chart, or right side of the dashboard, we see we have a missing updates by category, right? So now we're showing you an update level view, right? So here's the categories of updates, and then you click on a category and you can get, well, within that category, here's all the updates within that category that are not installed in every device. And then we can go ahead and drill down into that and say, okay, well, these are the devices upon which that particular update is not installed. And in both cases, when we talk about these details here, they're showing, we have an export option, so you can go ahead and export that data. We prompt you, hey, you're filtering, do you want to do all of it? And what that allows you to do is basically exporting it to a comma delimited file, and that allows you to suck that into other tools if you so desire. So I think that's it. That's all I really have for the software update deployment status, SUDS as we'd like to call it. Again, it's intended to be visual. It's intended to allow you to very quickly evaluate your patching compliance, both at a simple level, right? Hey, there's a chart. It's compliant, non-compliant, unknown, but also lets you drill down into, okay, well, why is it not compliant? And then crucially, to actually take some action on that. It's like, well, okay, let's go ahead and try and install these updates again. Or we're not there yet. One of the things we'd love to do as well, this update isn't deployed. I think there's a user voice out there for, hey, go ahead and deploy that software. I said user voice, I should say user voice. Our feature request board has a feature request for, hey, allow us to go ahead and trigger the deployment of that software update. And that's something we'd like to spend time doing. We just need our customers to tell us it's important to do. So that's all I have for software update deployment status. I'll go ahead and hand it back to Chelsea.
Thanks, Bryan. Okay, so recap on, for those of you that weren't able to join us yesterday, this is a series of webinars. We have 5 total where we're deep diving into each of the dashboards we have. Yesterday we covered the Active Directory cleanup tool. Tomorrow, Mark Godfrey will cover the hardware and firmware audit dashboard. And then next week, we'll cover lapse compliance on Wednesday with our CTO, Chris Muster. And then Mark will round out the series on next Thursday on the BitLocker compliance. If you haven't signed up for others yet, you can still do so. I will post the link in the chat to sign up for the other webinars in this series. And one other note before we move into Q&A, if you are interested in getting a free trial of the dashboards, you can do so by downloading the latest 4.2 version of Right-Click Tools from any page on our site, and just fill out the form, and you'll get an email notification of with a link to download. So all users will receive 30 days free of the Enterprise Edition, including these dashboards. You can also see when I send this link in chat, you'll be able to see the on-demand video for the webinar yesterday as well. So with that, we will move on to Q&A, and please submit your questions within the Q&A section of the webinar. And it looks like we already have a few, so I will hand it over to Marty.
All right, very good, thank you. My name is Marty, I'm the Customer Success Manager here at Recast Software. Very happy to answer some questions that you have. We've got a couple that are queued up already. And I think we'll have Bryan show maybe his screen again as well, if possible, and we'll take a look at, that way we have something to look at while we're answering the questions. The very first question that we're gonna answer, who has rights to the software update deployment status? So there are a couple of things that you need to worry about with rights for software update deployment status. We actually have some of it on our website under our documentation page. But some of the big things that I see that people run into is definitely when you put in the configuration manager SQL database information, the user who's running the console needs to have the ability to read from that database. So we're actually pulling the database information, as Bryan was saying, we're pulling information right from the database. So the user would have to be able to read from that database in order to get information on compliance or non-compliance. Inside of our the Recast management server as well, you could limit users even to be able to use certain parts of the software update database as well. I'm going to do a shout out to our documentation pages for each of these that has both what Recast permissions are needed and what Microsoft permissions are needed. And that's at docs.recastsoftware.com. And if you go to the feature documentation page on security updates, and then this one, or security and compliance, and then the SUDS dashboard, and that has a ton of information on permissions. But yeah, absolutely, definitely permissions issues that you need to make sure that people have read access to databases and that kind of thing as well. When you decide to initiate install missing software updates, does that suppress reboots? So what we're talking about is actually going into the remote software center and letting it install the software updates. Essentially, what you are doing is it's as if you were going onto the computer, opening Software Center and clicking start. You're telling it, I want to do this, and I want to do it now. It will not suppress reboots. Essentially, it's going to get done with what it needs to do, and if a reboot is required, it's going to do a reboot. So you do want to make sure that you're a little bit careful with how that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to follow whatever the deployment setting is.
Okay.
Right, like in terms of like the prompts, like it shouldn't automatically, it's not going to just automatically reboot on them, but it will follow whatever client settings
Sure.
you
So
have
if you, for example, have a 90-minute notification and then a 30-minute notification.
Like it's going to,
and then
if
a
it need,
reboot, it'll do that.
yeah, like I guess the best way of saying it, if it needs a reboot, it'll trigger a pending reboot, right, on the device. But in and of itself, just because you're using our tool, it's not going to just, boom, go ahead and reboot that machine.
Next question is, if you click install for an update and the computer isn't on, once the computer connects again, will the installation start? No. And in fact, in order for Remote Software Center to show what is required or what will show up, it's actually doing WMI queries against the device itself. If the computer is not on, it's going to tell you that the computer is not on, and it's not going to give you information. Will there be recordings of these webinars? Yes, absolutely there will be.
And to that last one,
Ahead, sorry.
Marty, just to the last one, I was going to go ahead and run it. Like I actually, in the demo, when I ran that, you'll actually see that error in the Remote Software Center, right? We're going to tell you, let me go ahead and run this. And I'm just going to assume one of those boxes is on. We're actually going to tell you in the bottom right here, hey, we couldn't, way to go, Brian, way to pick a bunch of devices that are. So keep talking, and then, you talk, and I'll demo this, but that box will come up here saying, hey, the computer's not on.
Very good. We show SCCM is working on systems, but when we seem to find systems that aren't getting the updates or the software pushing out, can SCCM work and still have issues with other areas? So SCCM is huge, and it's vast, and it's complex, and it can fail in many, many ways. It works in many, many ways as well. So you can definitely see some information of why things have come back the way that they have. I think you could actually see on one of the ones that Brian picked, when you click down on the definition update, it said that it had installed, but a soft reboot was pending. So you definitely can see a little bit of information as to why it failed. We don't necessarily have a real great way. That's where you would end up going and looking at logs and see if you can figure out why updates weren't deployed. And there Brian is showing you the little errors. So there are a couple of machines there that weren't on. So it doesn't allow him to see the information about them. If I have most of my PCs in my device collection coming up non-compliant, what right-click tool would I use to make them compliant? So one of the things that, obviously, one of the things that we showed was going in and doing the Remote Software Center to try and get those updates to deploy. If there is some other things, if there are some other things that are failing, it's possible that we don't necessarily just have a right-click tool that says fix everything. But what you could start doing then is actually you would want to start investigating those machines and see exactly why things might not be installing. It's looking at logs, but any of the right-click tools are available to you. If you know potentially that you have one that it seems like the client is broken, you could do a client repair from a right-click tools window or anything like that. So
yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's like a bazillion reasons a software update may not install, and we have some stuff that helps, but like a big one is client health, and we actually have that sort of on the. I think there's a feature request out there. It's just a hard nut to crack, both for us and the product team, right? Like the product team, you could just make a user voice that says make the client work all the time, right? Like it seems like a reasonable user voice, but there's just so many different ways it fails. It's hard to comprehensively take a crack at it. The best I can tell you is go. What I always tell people is the first thing you should do is go implement some sort of external client health solution, and there's a several out there.
When update install failures, is there a remove Windows Update cache right-click tool for removing and then attempting that software installation? So you can actually clear what is in the config manager cache using our, I believe that's going to be in is that in the client information tool? Absolutely. So in the client information tool, there is a way to go ahead and remove information that is in the right-click tool or in the configuration manager cache. you can actually go here and you can see, if you look at cache details there, it'll actually show you the different applications that are in the cache. It takes a little bit because it's actually querying against the computer, and then it's querying against the config manager to try and match up what things are. But you absolutely can select one of these things. If you know one of them seems to be faulty or broken, you can click on it and click delete content, and that will clear that. I'm looking at a specific machine in SUDS, and it states non-compliant, but when I expand it, all the updates show true in deployed. So what we're showing when we expand it is the applications that are actually deployed doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually installed and reported back that it has installed successfully and that everything is working. So there may be just a little bit of a differentiation in the fact that even though you've deployed it, it may not have actually installed correctly. So that's going to be where you can, going on to the Software Center, Remote Software Center might give you a little bit of information, a little bit more information about what's actually installed, or what their Remote Software Center, what Software Centers actually.
Yeah, it either means that, you know, deadline hasn't hit yet, right?
Sure.
Or it's unavailable, or it is deployed, it's just not installed. And actually, just, I mean, I'll tell you, just this morning when I was reviewing SUDS again to prepare for this, I was like, we really should have. I actually wrote up an internal user story for when we drill down at that data. We should tell you that, right? We should tell you it's failed or it's waiting for maintenance window. That data needs to be there.
For undeployed updates that are needed, is there a way to download the missing update and add it to the existing deployment from this console? From this console, there is not a good way to do that. There are other ways to do that, but not from this console.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about earlier, right? Like it's in our mind, and that's one we struggle with, because what we try not to do is reinvent their wheel, right? We're not trying to recreate System Center, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Configuration Manager, right? We're not trying to reinvent and do what Config Manager does. And so when we think about that particular problem, which is, okay, we've identified that a update is needed, but it's not deployed. I really want you to give you some real nice, easy thing, just right click and deploy it, right? But that boils down to rebuilding the software deployment wizard, right? Like there's all these choices you have to make. And so we're sort of stuck on I'm not aware of any easy way to just trigger the software update deployment wizard. If there was, that's what we would do. So right now we kind of define that problem as recreate the software update deployment wizard. That's the task. And it just hasn't been one we've decided to chew on yet. And part of it, part of all these webinars we keep trying to hammer, we have the feature request board, and that'd be one, right? Like if we have a lot of people using these tools, and if hundreds of them said, hey, we need this, we'd probably, it helps us prioritize that time. Brenda asked one above there, right? If I start scanning all systems, a way to cancel it. So here's the thing. It gets to what I was alluding to at the very start of the demo here. In terms of loading the data, you don't get to start, stop, or cancel that. The moment you hit software update deployment status, on the background, what the Recast server is going to go do is it's going to start downloading all that data. All this stuff is all about filtering that data, right? So the moment you open SUDS, it's going to load that data in the background. And when you hit start here, all it's doing is saying, okay, we're going to filter that data. Now, the way it works is when you hit start, if the data isn't loaded yet, it's going to make you wait, right? We're going to wait till all the data is loaded and then go ahead and filter it. So yeah, there's no way to really cancel hey, I want to load all the data. And I don't know that we have hey, I hit start and I want to stop. Mostly because there's nothing really to stop at that point. But I kind of yeah, we'd probably need to talk and think about like what the problem we want to solve there is, and think about that, like what does cancel really mean in that scenario? Do you want to stop just the filtering? Well, the filtering's not really doing anything yet. Do you actually want to stop the loading of data? And then what does that look like? So
we had a follow-up to the specific machine in SUDS that's staying non-compliant, but when you actually go and look at the device, it's showing true for deployed. Nothing is showing up in Software Center. It's been a few days, it's been rebooted. What you're definitely going to want to do there is do a little bit more investigation. What I would do is verify that those updates actually have been installed. With the right-click tools, you can actually do that, I believe, by going to system information on that device, and it'll give you a list of all the KDEs that have been installed on the device. So I would definitely make sure that those have been installed. And then if they've installed and it is actually compliant, remember, we're looking at the configuration manager database. So at some level, it thinks that it's not compliant. So it might be interesting to take a look and figure out why it's not checking back in, or if there's some kind of a communication thing that's going on that's not allowing it to check back in and see, and say, hey, I'm compliant with these updates. One more, does it give a reason as to why it is waiting, like awaiting a reboot, awaiting a prior update? Probably the best place that we have that information is in Remote Software Center, where you can see that some of them said that they were pending a reboot or something like that, which then we can go ahead and, yeah, and then we can go ahead and you can see what it might have.
yeah, and that's what I was talking about earlier, right? Like when I added that story, user story internally just this morning, because when you drill down into this data, great, we say it's deployed or not, but what I also want to know here is, well, what's the status, right? We don't show you what the actual status is. Is it failed? Is it waiting for, and that's what several people have asked, and I totally agree. We need to have that here. Yeah. So then the question is, right, we were talking again about I think this gets down to the cancel question, right? Like, yeah, I think we could probably put more. Let me try and show that. Let me restart this, right? I think we could absolutely add more data to the software update dashboard when it load. Again, what I would point you towards is the feature request page, right? Because I think that's a good place to sort of talk it out a little bit among other people and see what the desire is. We'll see this. This is our demo environment, which is on a really old cruddy server. There's a push and pull, some trade-offs here for how we do this, right? We do load all that data, right? And we load every, and this is the bar I think you're talking about, right? Like, and so that makes it look like we're done loading the data, but it's really not. What that really just means is we loaded the collections and we loaded the software update groups. That little brief bar you just saw was the, hey, I'm not done loading data yet. And so, yeah, fine, I could totally agree. I would go ahead and put something on our feature request board to sort of enhance, give you more information about what the SUDS is doing. What I was trying to talk about a second ago is the push and pull is we load all that data, and that can take time. We're talking, in certain cases, millions of records. And we do some the way we load it, we try not to load all of that data. We don't load every single record, because there's actually ends up being a lot of null data in there that we don't need. But it is big. If you have 100,000 devices, it's going to take some time, right, to load all that data. And so we could absolutely do a better job of kind of giving you that feedback for, hey, here's what SUDS is doing right now. All right, any other questions?
I think we'll wrap up. I don't see any other questions coming in. So thanks so much again for joining us, and we hope to see you on another webinar either tomorrow or next week. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.